Imagine you wake up in a house
Right.
and you know this house perfectly.
Hmm.
You know exactly where the creaky stairs are.
Hmm.
You know where the coffee mugs live in the kitchen.
Yeah, you know the exact shade of blue on the bedroom wall.
Exactly. But then you go to lean against one of those walls and your hand just passes right through it. The stairs suddenly lead to the ceiling,
Wow.
right? The foundation just turns completely liquid. Everything you thought was, fixed, structural, permanent, is actually just a suggestion. It
Ooh.
is entirely up for
It's
grabs.
It is a profoundly unsettling thought. I mean, humans are hardwired to crave solidity. We build our entire lives, our careers, our relationships around the assumption that the ground beneath our feet is going to stay put.
Yeah, we want reality to be a finished product. But what if that assumption is actually the biggest trap of all? Because that is the mission of today's deep dive. We're looking at a stack of 7 seemingly random books.
Right, we have ancient Roman poetry, 90s cyberpunk sci-fi, existential philosophy, a breakdown of modern financial markets, and even a Hollywood screenwriting manual. On the surface, it looks like someone just dumped a thrift store bookshelf onto the desk.
It totally does. But underneath the varying genres, they form a remarkably unified architecture.
Right.
What we are exploring today is a meta-framework for living.
Yes. We are tracking a very specific progression, moving from the most fundamental question, which is what is reality, to who am I within it?
Right.
And then finally arriving at how do I act and create meaning?
I really love looking at it this way. My background is in systems architecture, so I naturally think of this as exploring a 3-layer operating system for life. Like, these 7 books are the hardware, but the framework we are going to extract today, that is the kernel.
The core code.
Exactly, the core code. We are shifting from treating life as an isolated philosophical problem to seeing it as an exercise in networked agency. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with layer 1. We're calling this the engine.
Yeah.
And the core thematic focus here is that reality is completely plastic. It is not a solid state.
Right. And to really grasp what we mean by plastic, we have to start way back in antiquity with Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is, a foundational text of Western literature. It presents a mythic worldview where the only absolute constant is change. In Ovid's universe, you have Daphne turning into a laurel tree to escape Apollo.
Right, humans becoming constellations or animals.
Exactly. But Ovid isn't just writing fairy tales here. He is making a profound philosophical claim about the nature of existence, which is that identity is inherently fluid. Reality isn't a static object you can hold.
Yeah.
It is a continuous, often violent process of becoming something else.
Which is such a wild thing to pair with our second book, Greg Egan's Permutation City.
Yeah.
We jump from ancient Roman myth straight into hard science fiction.
And it's quite the leap.
It really is. Egan detaches human identity entirely from biology. In his novel, consciousness is treated as purely computational. He explores the idea of digital scans of human brains running in simulated environments.
And what is crucial about Egan's world is how that simulation functions. If you create a perfect digital copy of a mind, and that mind wakes up in a simulated room, to that mind, the room is completely real.
Right.
The desk feels like wood. The coffee tastes bitter.
Yes. Meaning reality is substrate independent. It doesn't matter if your mind is running on a wet lump of gray matter in a skull or on a server rack somewhere.
Exactly.
You aren't your physical body. You are just a pattern of information.
Whether you are looking at it through the lens of Ovid's ancient myth or Egan's futuristic code, the insight synthesizes perfectly. Reality is defined by information and pattern, not by physical substance.
Right.
You have to stop asking what is real and start asking what persists through all this change.
See, I look at this, and my first instinct is to say, okay, most people treat reality like a compiled read-only program.
Yeah.
You boot it up and you can't change the code.
Mm-hmm.
But Ovid and Egan are telling us that reality is actually an open source code base. The variables can be rewritten. But I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Because conceptually, that sounds great. But if I accidentally touch a hot stove, my hand blisters. I feel actual pain. If everything is just a plastic pattern of information, how do we account for the absolute visceral weight of human experience?
That is the hard problem of consciousness.
Exactly. Doesn't the fact that we genuinely feel things disrupt this neat computational model?
It is a very fair objection, and to be honest, it is the exact vulnerability that pushes us into the next layer of the system. The physical pain is undeniable, yes. But the meaning of that pain, the context of your existence, that is entirely unanchored.
I see.
And that instability, the terrifying realization that the structure generating your reality can be completely arbitrary, is what triggers the total collapse of inherent meaning. If the reality engine is constantly shifting, then the inherited rules we use to navigate it suddenly lose all their structural integrity.
Which brings us to the void, layer 2, the collapse of meaning. Because once reality loses its permanent stability, all the meaning systems we have built on top of it, religion, societal expectations, career ladders, they just dissolve.
Precisely. And this is where we bring in Friedrich Nietzsche's basic writings. Nietzsche is incredibly famous for declaring that God is dead.
Right, but people often misunderstand that as just a critique of theology, don't they?
They do. The deeper, more terrifying implication of that statement is that all inherited meaning systems have collapsed. Morality, truth, value, they are not objective facts waiting to be discovered out in the universe like gravity.
They aren't laws of physics.
Exactly. They are human constructs. They are frameworks imposed by power dynamics and historical accidents.
So truth isn't found in the universe, it is forced onto the canvas.
Yes. And to really understand what it feels like to live on that blank canvas, we look at Albert Camus.
Oh, Camus, right. The myth of Sisyphus.
Exactly. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus focuses on what he calls the absurd. And the absurd isn't just something being silly. The absurd is the fundamental, agonizing conflict between our desperate human desire for meaning and the cold, silent universe that offers absolutely none in return.
To explain Sisyphus, for anyone who might not know the myth, he is the guy punished by the gods, doomed to push a massive boulder up a hill for eternity. Every time he gets near the top, the boulder rolls all the way back down. He has to walk down and start over forever. It is the ultimate metaphor for pointless, grinding labor.
And Camus focuses on the specific moment Sisyphus is walking back down the hill. The universe has offered Sisyphus no inherent script other than suffering.
Yeah.
But for Camus, despair or suicide is a philosophical failure. It is an escape, not an answer. Meaning must be lived through defiant revolt. Camus concludes that we must imagine Sisyphus happy.
But how? I mean, how is a guy pushing a rock for eternity happy?
Because the act of pushing the boulder, the resistance itself, the clear-eyed acceptance of his fate without surrendering to despair, is what creates his human dignity.
Oh, wow.
He becomes the master of his days simply by owning the struggle. The meaning isn't at the top of the hill. The meaning is in the pushing.
I really want to pause on this.
Yeah.
Because if we combine Nietzsche and Camus, we're basically admitting we exist in an entirely unwritten system. The truth isn't out there. Meaning is a human invention.
Yeah.
So if nothing is given, what do you actually do with that blank canvas? It sounds incredibly heavy. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. This isn't nihilistic despair.
Not at all.
Nietzsche's concept of the will to power and Camus' revolt, these are actually the very first steps of user agency. It is the moment you realize you have root access to the system. You get to write the rules.
And that is the crucial pivot. Once you realize the universe has no script for you, you are forced to ask a terrifying new question, which is, how should I live? You can't just float in the void of layer 2 forever. You need a stabilization mechanism. You need a way to operate within this plastic, meaningless engine without losing your mind. And that demands an interface.
Which brings us perfectly to layer 3, the interface. The self as a response. We have established that you cannot stabilize reality. It is way too fluid. But you can stabilize your stance within it. Identity becomes a constructed response. And for this, we pull from Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations.
What is extraordinary about Marcus Aurelius is the context of his writing. He was a Roman emperor. He was arguably the most powerful man in the world, often writing these notes to himself at night in war tents on the frontiers of the empire. He had near absolute control over the known world.
Wow.
Yet the architectural core of his stoicism is the idea that reality itself is completely neutral. It is human judgment that creates suffering.
Meaning, it is not the rain that makes you miserable, it is your opinion that getting wet is a bad thing.
Precisely. He argues that freedom doesn't come from controlling the external world, which even an emperor found impossible, but from mastering your inner response to it. You observe the external chaos, you discipline your perception, and you build internal order.
My tech brain immediately wants to call Marcus Aurelius the firewall of the human mind. Think about it. Layer 1 is the external event, the chaotic reality. Layer 2 is the mind encountering the void of meaning.
Yes.
Layer 3 is this firewall deciding what gets through. But actually, Firewall implies just blocking data. It is more like a real-time compiler. It takes raw, chaotic code from the world and reframes it into something actionable.
That is a great analogy.
But again, I struggle with how clean this sounds in theory. Doesn't this hyper-rationalism ignore the messy reality of human biology?
Yeah.
Trauma, intense grief, profound exhaustion, these things physically alter our brains. They can easily override reason.
Absolutely.
And beyond that, can't this kind of radical acceptance just become an excuse for passivity? Like if you just accept the chaos, you never try to change the world.
It is a profound critique, and it is one Marcus Aurelius himself wrestled with constantly. He wasn't a robot. He buried several of his own children. He knew profound grief.
Right.
What is fascinating here is that the self, in this Stoic framework, isn't a passive receiver that just numbs itself to pain. It is an active interface. Aurelius isn't advocating for surrender. He is advocating for sovereignty.
What is the distinction there?
Sovereignty means the space between stimulus and response belongs to you. You still feel the grief, you still feel the anger, but you refuse to let that emotion dictate your core character or your next action.
Oh, I see.
Once the self is stabilized, once you aren't constantly being blown around by every external event or emotional spike, you possess a grounded center. And only when you have that internal sovereignty are you finally equipped to project your will outward into the collective.
Okay, that clicks for me. Because internal sovereignty is great for your own peace of mind, but we don't live in a vacuum. We aren't isolated servers.
No, we aren't.
We have to interact with the chaotic, plastic reality of billions of other people. How does a stabilized self navigate that? We have to scale the system up. That is layer 4 and layer 5. Networked agency and authorship.
We are moving now from individual philosophy to collective reality. If meaning and value aren't inherent to the universe, as we established with Nietzsche, then what are they?
Right.
They are socially engineered fictions, and to understand how those fictions move real-world systems, we look at a seemingly completely different kind of book, Nathaniel Popper's The Trolls of Wall Street.
Oh yeah, this book tracks the phenomenon of retail investors, everyday people on the internet, using digital coordination to challenge massive institutional financial power.
And what is fascinating here isn't the specific financial mechanics, but the impartial observation of how collective belief works.
Break that down a bit.
Well, a group of people on a forum decide that a struggling legacy video game retailer is incredibly valuable. They coordinate, they type diamond hands and buy the stock. And because enough of them believe it and act on it, they literally force the market to reprice reality.
It is incredible. The narrative becomes the reality. Belief becomes math. The institutions would seem like permanent fixtures of reality. The solid walls from our opening metaphor are actually vulnerable, fragile systems.
Exactly.
The market isn't a purely rational entity driven by fundamentals. It is a social system driven by narrative and crowd behavior.
Yes. And if narrative is the tool that can move billions of dollars and alter collective systems, then we need to know how to build a narrative. That is where our final book comes in. Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook.
We transition from financial hierarchies to literal narrative architecture. It's a screenwriting manual.
It is. Brody argues that storytelling isn't just magical inspiration that strikes you in the shower. It is engineered. Structure generates emotional meaning. She lays out specific beats, the catalyst, the midpoint, the all is lost moment.
I love how this connects. Because if you take Brody's beat sheet and apply it to the philosophy we have been discussing, life itself becomes a story you are structuring in real time. Like if you face a massive failure and you just view it as a random tragedy in the void, it crushes you. But if you frame that failure as your all is lost beat, the necessary low point, right before the third act resolution, you have used narrative to gain control over chaos. You've re-engineered the meaning of the event.
That is the exact synthesis. Meaning and value are socially engineered fictions, yes, but when you structure them correctly, they move real systems, they move markets, and they move your own psychology.
But wait, doesn't forcing life or art into predictable beats like setup, confrontation, resolution, doesn't that make everything incredibly formulaic? Doesn't imposing a rigid structure before you create actually kill the creativity?
It is a very common objection, but the source provides a brilliant counter-perspective. Constraints actually enable creativity. Absolute freedom, the total blank canvas of layer 2, is paralyzing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think of a poet writing a sonnet. The strict constraint of 14 lines doesn't kill the poetry. It forces the poet to distill their thought, to be brilliant within the boundaries. By applying a structure, a beat sheet, you are providing a container for the chaos. You aren't limiting the story, you're ensuring it can be understood by others.
Okay, let's zoom out and look at the whole machine we have just built from this wild stack of books. We have layer 1, the reality engine, constantly shifting in plastic, where information is more real than matter.
Right.
We have layer 2, the void, where inherent meaning collapses and we are left with the blank canvas. We have layer 3, the stabilized self, acting as a sovereign interface through stoic reframing.
Yes.
And we have layers 4 and 5, the narrative tools, collective belief, and structured beats used to alter network systems. So what does this all actually mean for you, the listener? How do we actually operate this machine?
This is where we must move from the theory of reality into the mechanics of production without falling into the trap of self-delusion. The sources outline an operational blueprint for this, which they call System 0.
Right. System 0, it has 3 specific tracks. Track 1 is called the sieve. This represents the self. The aesthetic described here is brutalist essentialism.
Which sounds a bit intense.
That totally does. But practically, it means aggressively stripping away the consensus narrative. You take a piece of information, or life choice, and you run it through the sieve. You strip away what society tells you to care about. You strip away your own ego until you find the zero-state proposition.
The absolute core.
Right. What is the undeniable truth that remains when all the external validation is gone?
Then you move to track 2, the multiplier. This represents the machine. You take that stripped-down zero-state proposition and you explore its possibilities. The text refers to running it through the latent space.
And for those not deep into AI architecture, what exactly do we mean by latent space here?
In machine learning, the latent space is the hidden underlying representation of data where similar concepts are grouped together. It is the realm of undiscovered combinations. In human terms, it means taking your core idea and running 1,000 mental iterations. You look for hidden symmetries.
Wow.
You treat your mind and perhaps literally use AI as a collaborative tool, as software to test how this idea interacts with different variables until you find a stable, powerful pattern.
And finally, track 3, the stabilizer. This represents the system. You take that stable pattern you discovered in the latent space and you harden it into a real-world structure. You build a monolith, like a business, a book, a white paper. You make it tangible so it survives the swarm of collective belief.
But here is where we must apply the most crucial part of this entire framework, the skeptic's audit, because there is a massive seductive danger hidden inside System 0. It is called the simulacrum of control.
Oh man, this part of the text felt like a personal attack.
It is deeply relatable for anyone who loves learning. The danger is that by simply naming things, by organizing your notes meticulously, creating elaborate mental models, categorizing ideas into the sieve or the multiplier, you trick yourself into feeling powerful.
You feel like you are commanding reality because your digital notes are perfectly tagged.
Precisely. But in truth, you are just a part-time cook writing in an obsidian vault. You are playing at engineering, but you aren't actually building anything that interacts with the real world. You have constructed a beautiful simulation of work rather than doing the work.
Which is exactly why the text demands what it calls the Forge's correction. This framework, this entire operating system we've discussed today, must produce material results. It has to generate capital or influence or finished art.
It has to be real.
Right.
Oh.
If it doesn't produce material results out there in the messy plastic reality, then it is just a closed loop. It is intellectual masturbation instead of an actual engine doing work. You have to take your first chaos seed, run it through the interpretation protocol, and execute.
And that brings us to the final insight. The mechanism that unites all 7 of these seemingly disparate books.
Let's hear it.
We are not living inside a fixed world. We are participating in the ongoing real-time construction of reality, meaning, and identity simultaneously. You aren't just a character trapped in a simulation. You have access to the source code. But having access isn't enough. You have to write.
Let me summarize that because it is the absolute core takeaway of this deep dive. Reality is negotiable.
Yeah.
Meaning is invented. The self is a tool. Use it deliberately.
It is a staggering amount of responsibility, which leaves you with one final thought to mull over. If reality is a fluid, networked narrative, and you now know you have the tools to author your own beat sheet, what happens if you choose not to use them?
That is a heavy question.
If you aren't structuring your story in real time, whose collective fiction are you blindly acting in right now?
That is the question that stays with you. Look at your own reading stack. Look at the narratives you are absorbing every day, and see if you can find the hidden architecture within them. We will leave you to process that. Until next time, keep exploring the layers.